I'm standing in the wine cellar of a $47 million penthouse, holding a bottle worth more than my father's lifetime earnings, and the man who owns it, Marcus Hadley, the tech billionaire who just fired 4,000 people last week, is unconscious on the marble floor, choking on his own vomit. His lips are turning blue. I have maybe 90 seconds to decide if I save his life or let him die. That's not the choice I thought I'd be making when I took this job. Let me go back. 6 months earlier, I was working doubles at a wine bar in Brooklyn, living in a studio apartment with black mold blooming in the corners, and a landlord who'd increased my rent for the 3rd time in 2 years. My name is Sophia Reyes. I'm 29 years old, and I'd spent 7 years becoming a certified sommelier, one of only 274 master sommeliers in the world. That certification cost me $42,000 in courses, travel, and examination fees. I passed on my 4th attempt. The certification should have opened doors. Instead, I was pouring 8-gallon glasses of Pinot Grigio to finance bros who called me sweetheart and tipped in single dollars. My father called me every Sunday from our apartment in Queens, the same rent-controlled place where I grew up, where he'd raised me alone after my mother left when I was 4. He was a doorman at a luxury building on the Upper East Side. 63 years old, arthritic hands, still working 10-hour shifts because his pension wouldn't cover the medication he needed for his heart condition. "Mija," he'd say, "you have a gift. God will provide." God wasn't providing. My student loans were $127,000 and growing. I was drowning. Then I got the call. A recruiter, a woman named Patricia, with a voice like champagne and frost. "Miss Reyes, I represent a private client seeking a personal sommelier." Your name came up in very exclusive circles. The compensation is $280,000 annually, full benefits, housing included. The position is residential. You'd live on the premises. Are you interested in hearing more? I almost dropped the phone. The interview was in a conference room in a building I'd walked past 1,000 times, but never entered. One of those structures in Midtown where the lobby has original Rothkos and the security guards wear suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Patricia was 50-ish, beautiful in that preserved way that requires serious money, wearing a Cartier watch that could have paid off my father's medical bills. She slid a non-disclosure agreement across the table, 23 pages. "Before we proceed," she said, "you need to understand the discretion required. My client values privacy above all else. You'll be exposed to intimate details of his life, his business dealings, his personal habits. Nothing, and I mean nothing, leaves that penthouse. Violation of this NDA will result in immediate termination and legal action. The penalties are substantial. We've sued former employees for $15 million. I signed it. I was desperate. I needed this. "The client," Patricia continued, "is Marcus Hadley." I knew the name. Everyone did. Marcus Hadley had founded Axiom Technologies at 23, sold it at 29 for $8.4 billion, then built an investment empire that made him one of the 50 richest people in America. He was 42 now, estimated net worth somewhere north of $19 billion. He'd been on the cover of Forbes 6 times. The media called him the Vulture because of his aggressive acquisition strategy. He'd buy struggling companies, strip them down, fire massive portions of the workforce, then flip them for enormous profits. He was ruthless, brilliant, and according to Patricia, he was also a wine collector with one of the most valuable private cellars in the world. "Marcus has over 8,000 bottles," she said. "Estimated value of the collection is $34 million. He needs someone who can manage it, pair wines for his dinners, educate him on new acquisitions, and accompany him to auctions and vineyard tours. You'd also be responsible for entertaining guests. He hosts frequently. Investors, politicians, celebrities. Your presentation needs to be impeccable." She looked at me, really looked at me. At my thrift store blazer, my scuffed shoes, my nail polish that I'd applied myself because I couldn't afford a manicure. "We'll provide a wardrobe stipend," she added. $25,000 initially, then $5,000 quarterly. Marcus expects his staff to reflect his standards. $25,000 for clothes. I took the job. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Tribeca. The elevator required a key and a fingerprint scan. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that didn't feel real. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Danish furniture that looked like art installations. A Gerhard Richter painting that I later learned he'd bought for $18 million hanging in the foyer. The wine cellar was in the sub-basement, climate-controlled to exactly 55 degrees Fahrenheit with 70% humidity. Walking into it was like entering a cathedral. Bottles lined the walls in custom mahogany racks. Chateau Margaux 1787, Screaming Eagle Cabernet 1992, Domaine de la Romanée Conti 1945. Each bottle had been logged, photographed, and insured. Some of them were worth $50,000. A few exceeded $100,000. I'd never touched anything that valuable in my life. Marcus Hadley barely acknowledged me for the first 3 weeks. He was exactly what I expected. Cold, distracted, perpetually on his phone, conducting business in clipped sentences that ended careers. He was handsome in that maintained way wealthy men achieve. Personal trainer, dermatologist, tailored suits from Savile Row, haircut every 10 days. His watch was a Patek Philippe Nautilus worth $450,000. He wore it like it was a Timex. He'd breeze through the penthouse surrounded by assistants, lawyers, advisors, a rotating cast of expensive people managing his expensive life. I was just another employee, invisible. My job was simple: maintain the cellar, prepare wine for his dinners, and stay out of the way. I sent half my first paycheck to my father. He cried on the phone. The first time Marcus actually spoke to me, really spoke to me, not just barked instructions, was at a dinner party he hosted for a group of venture capitalists. 12 guests, 20,400 per person tasting menu prepared by a Michelin-starred chef he'd flown in from Copenhagen. My job was to pair wines for each course. I'd chosen a 2009 Krug Clos d'Ambonnet for the amuse-bouche, a champagne so rare that only 3,000 bottles had been produced. It cost $4,200 per bottle. I was pouring when one of the guests, a man in his 50s with the kind of tan that comes from Caribbean vacations and contempt for the working class, stopped me. "Is this really necessary?" he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Champagne with caviar, so predictable. I expected more from Marcus's Sommelier." The table went quiet. Marcus looked up from his conversation. I could have backed down. I could have apologized, chosen something else, made myself smaller. Instead, I said, "The minerality of the Krug complements the brininess of the Osetra caviar, while the wine's brioche notes create a textural bridge to the crème fraîche. The 2009 vintage has remarkable depth. Most champagnes are designed for immediate consumption, but this one has complexity that unfolds over minutes. If you'd prefer something less predictable, I can open the 1996 Salon, but that's $8,000 a bottle, and frankly, it would be wasted on this course. The Krug is the right choice." The man stared at me. The table stared at me. Then Marcus laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "She's right, David," he said. "Drink the fucking champagne." The man drank. The dinner continued. And when the guests left 4 hours later, Marcus found me in the cellar, putting away the empty bottles. "That was ballsy," he said. "That was accurate," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You really know wine." "I'm a master sommelier." "That's why you hired me." "I hired you because Patricia said you were qualified. I assumed you were competent. I didn't realize you had a backbone." He walked closer, examining a bottle of 1982 Chateau Latour I'd been cataloging. $12,000, he said, reading the tag. I bought this at auction 3 years ago. Never opened it. Do you think it's ready? It's been ready for a decade, I said. But it'll also be ready for another 20 years. Wine like that doesn't demand to be drunk. It waits. The question isn't whether it's ready. The question is whether you are. Something shifted in his expression. Something I couldn't read. Open it, he said. Now? Now. I opened the bottle with hands that only trembled slightly, poured 2 glasses. We sat on the floor of the cellar, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of wine, and drank a $12,000 bottle of Bordeaux in silence. It was the best wine I'd ever tasted. Layers of black currant, tobacco, leather, earth. It had depth I didn't know wine could have, like drinking history, complexity, time itself. When we finished, Marcus said, "My father was a plumber, did you know that?" I didn't. Died when I was 16. Massive coronary on a job site. Left my mother with $40,700 in the bank and $63,000 in debt. I worked 3 jobs through college, slept in my car, ate ramen for 18 months straight. When Axiom took off, I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable again. I'd never be at the mercy of someone else's decisions. I'd never be poor. He looked at me. I built something, I built everything, and people hate me for it. I didn't know what to say. "You grew up poor, P," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Your father?" "Doorman, Queens, 63 years old, still working full-time." Marcus nodded slowly. "You understand what it means to need money. To actually need it. Not want it, need it." "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. "Because I need you to understand something. This life, this penthouse, these bottles, these dinners where we spend more on wine than most people earn in a month, it's not real. It's a performance. It's armor. And I'm so fucking tired of performing." He stood up, walked to the door, then turned back. "Thank you for the wine," he said. After that night, everything changed. Marcus started asking me to join him for dinners, not as staff, but as a guest. We'd sit in the penthouse dining room, just the 2 of us, and he'd ask me to choose the wine, to tell him stories about how I learned about different regions and varietals. He was curious about my life in a way that felt almost hungry. He wanted to know about growing up in Queens, about my father, about what it was like to work in restaurants where customers treated you like you were disposable. "They don't see you," I told him once. "You're scenery. You're the help. You could be brilliant or broken or dying inside, and they wouldn't notice because you're not a person to them. You're a service." "I know," he said quietly. "I was invisible too before the money. People looked through me like I was glass." I realized something then. Marcus Hadley was the loneliest person I'd ever met. He had everything, wealth beyond imagination, power that could reshape markets, access to any experience money could buy. And he was profoundly, devastatingly alone. His friends were business associates who wanted favors. His girlfriends, a rotation of models and actresses, wanted the lifestyle. His family had been systematically alienated by his ruthlessness in business. He'd sacrificed every genuine relationship on the altar of success. And now, at 42, with $19 billion in the bank, he was sitting in a $47 million penthouse, drinking $12,000 wine with his sommelier, because I was the only person who talked to him like he was human. I should have been more careful. I should have maintained professional distance. But I was lonely too. And he was interesting, genuinely interesting beneath the cold exterior. He was wickedly funny, shockingly well-read, capable of talking for hours about philosophy, history, art. He had a mind like a blade. And he was kind to me in ways that felt dangerously personal. He noticed when I was tired and sent me to bed early. He asked about my father and arranged for a specialist to consult on his treatment. Off the books, no charge. When my studio apartment's mold problem got worse, he had his lawyers threaten my landlord with a lawsuit. Within a week, I had a renovated apartment. You don't have to do these things, I told him. I know, he said. I want to. 3 months into the job, I realized I was falling in love with him. It was the stupidest thing I could have done. The night it all fell apart started like any other. Marcus was hosting a business dinner. 6 investors considering a $3.8 billion acquisition deal. High stakes, high tension. I'd prepared an elaborate wine pairing, starting with a 2004 Krug for the appetizers, moving through a 1999 Chateau Palmer for the lamb, finishing with a 1983 Chateau d'Yquem for dessert. The dinner was going well until one of the investors, a man named Robert Kenworth, old money from Connecticut, the kind of aristocratic asshole who wore boat shoes without socks, started interrogating Marcus about the recent layoffs at one of his portfolio companies. 4,000 people, Kenworth said, swirling his wine. 4,000 families, right before Christmas. That's brutal, even by your standards. Marcus's jaw tightened. The company was hemorrhaging money. We restructured to save it. Sometimes you have to amputate to save the body. Easy to say when you're not the limb being cut off, Kenworth replied. The table shifted uncomfortably. I was standing by the sideboard, holding the Chateau Palmer, and I could see Marcus's face shutting down, that cold mask sliding back into place. Those people, Kenworth continued, they have children, mortgages, medical bills, and you took their livelihoods so you could make another billion you don't need. I took their jobs because they were redundant, Marcus said flatly. Business isn't a charity. No, Kenworth said, but it doesn't have to be sociopathic either. Marcus stood up. If you're not interested in the deal, Robert, you're welcome to leave. I'm not going anywhere, Kenworth said. I'm just wondering if the Vulture has a conscience, or if it died along with those 4,000 jobs. Marcus walked over to where I was standing. His hands were shaking, barely, but I noticed. He took the bottle from me, refilled his glass, and drank half of it in one swallow. Sophia, he said, bring up the 1990 Petrus. I knew that bottle. It was in the back of the cellar, in the section reserved for Marcus's most prized acquisitions. It was worth $38,000. Marcus, I said quietly, that bottle is... I know what it is, he snapped. Bring it up. I brought it up. He opened it himself roughly and poured it for the table, investors who barely noticed they were drinking a wine that cost more than most cars. The dinner ended badly. The deal fell through. The investors left, and Marcus went into his study, took out a bottle of Macallan 25-year scotch worth $4,500 and proceeded to drink it alone. I should have left him. I should have gone to my room and let him self-destruct in private. Instead, I knocked on the door. Go away, he said. I opened it anyway. He was sitting on the floor by the window, the city glittering below him like a constellation of broken promises. The scotch bottle was half empty. He looked up at me and his eyes were red. You think I'm a monster, he said. I think you're hurting. I fired 4,000 people, he said. Kenworth's right. 4,000 people who needed those jobs. And I did it because the numbers said I had to. Because that's what you do when you're me. You make the hard decisions and you don't look back. Did you have a choice? I asked. There's always a choice, he said. I could have restructured differently. I could have taken less profit. I could have protected some of those jobs. But I didn't. Because I wanted to win. Because winning is all I know how to do. He drank more scotch. You know what the worst part is? I don't even feel it anymore. I read the headlines. I see the articles about the families I destroyed, and I feel nothing. I'm numb. I'm empty. I've become exactly what they say I am. I sat down next to him on the floor. You arranged for my father's medical care, I said. You didn't have to do that. You did it because you're not empty. That's different, he said. That's you. You're... He stopped. I'm what? I asked. He looked at me, and there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable and terrified. You're real, he said. Everything else is performance, but you're real. He kissed me. I kissed him back. It was a mistake, a massive, catastrophic mistake. He was my employer. I was his employee. The power dynamic was impossible to navigate. Everything about it was wrong. But in that moment, with the taste of $4,500 scotch on his lips and the city lights reflecting in the window, it felt like the only honest thing in his life. We ended up in his bedroom, and afterwards, lying in sheets that probably cost more than my monthly salary, he held me and said, I don't want to be the vulture anymore. I don't want to be the person who destroys things. I want to be someone who builds, someone who matters, someone worthy of you. You don't have to be worthy of me, I said. You just have to be yourself. What if myself isn't good enough? I didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, everything shattered. I woke up alone. Marcus was already dressed, standing by the window with his phone, speaking in the clipped voice he used for business. File the motion today. I want them out by Friday. No, I don't care about the optics. Just do it. He hung up, looked at me, and I saw the mask was back. The cold, ruthless businessman who'd fired 4,000 people and slept soundly afterwards. Last night was a mistake, he said. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus, you're my employee, Sophia. I crossed a line. It can't happen again. You said, I know what I said. I was drunk. I was vulnerable. It doesn't change reality. This is an employer-employee relationship, nothing more. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. I was real to him when he was lonely and drunk and broken. But in the daylight, I was still just the help. I understand, I said. I got dressed, walked out of his bedroom, went down to the cellar and started cataloging inventory because I needed to do something with my hands before I started crying or screaming or both. An hour later, Patricia showed up. Miss Reyes, she said, we need to discuss your contract. She knew. Of course she knew. Marcus probably called her the moment I left his bedroom. There's been a situation, she continued. Mr. Hadley has asked me to remind you of the NDA you signed. Specifically, the sections regarding personal relationships and disclosure of private information. Any violation will result in immediate termination and legal consequences. I'm not going to say anything, I said. I'm sure you're not, Patricia replied. However, Mr. Hadley feels it would be best if we restructured your role. You'll remain as sommelier, but you'll no longer be participating in dinners or personal interactions. You'll communicate with Mr. Hadley through me. Your access to the residential floors will be restricted to the cellar only. These changes are effective immediately. I'd been demoted, banished to the basement, turned back into scenery. Does he want me to quit? I asked. Mr. Hadley wants you to continue in your professional capacity, Patricia said. What happened last night was regrettable, but your work is excellent. There's no reason this can't continue on a purely professional basis. I thought about quitting. I thought about walking out and never coming back. But I had $127,000 in student loans. My father needed medical care. I'd sent Patricia's NDA to a lawyer friend who'd explained that if Marcus decided to sue me for breach of contract, I'd be buried in legal fees I couldn't afford. I was trapped. I needed the money, I needed the job. So I stayed. For the next 6 weeks, I lived in the cellar. Literally. I moved a cot down there because I couldn't bear to be upstairs, couldn't bear to see Marcus walking through the penthouse, living his life, pretending I didn't exist. I became exactly what that investor had called out at the dinner, invisible labor. I'd arrive with wine when requested, leave it on the counter, and disappear. Marcus never looked at me, never spoke directly to me. All communication went through Patricia. I hated him. I hated myself more for being weak enough to fall for him. And then, 6 weeks after that night, Patricia called me up to the penthouse for a special request. "Mr. Hadley is hosting a private dinner tonight," she said. "He's asked for something extraordinary. He wants you to choose the single most valuable bottle in the cellar, something that will make an impression. Cost is no object." I knew exactly which bottle she meant. In the back corner of the cellar, in a climate-controlled case behind glass, was a bottle of 1947 Chateau Cheval Blanc. It was one of only a few bottles remaining from that vintage, a legendary wine from a legendary year. Marcus had bought it at auction for $304,000. It was the most valuable bottle in his collection. I'd never been allowed to touch it, until now. I brought the bottle up to the kitchen, decanted it with hands that barely shook, and left it on the dining table where Marcus was waiting. He was alone. "Sir, your wine," I said, not looking at him. "Stay," he said. "I'm not supposed to—" "Stay," he repeated, "please." I stayed. He poured 2 glasses, slid one toward me. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." I waited. "The night we slept together," he said, "I panicked. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, protecting myself, making sure I'm never vulnerable. And then you came into my life, and those walls started cracking. I felt things I haven't felt in decades. Real things. Terrifying things." He drank some of the wine. His hands were shaking. "I pushed you away because I was afraid," he continued. "Afraid of needing you. Afraid of being the kind of person who falls in love with someone who works for him. Afraid of admitting that maybe being the Vulture isn't enough anymore." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I'm in love with you, Sophia. I'm in love with you, and I don't know what to do about it, because I've destroyed every genuine relationship I've ever had, and I can't bear the thought of destroying you too." I should have walked away. I should have told him it was too late, that he'd hurt me too badly, that love wasn't enough when there was a $19 billion power imbalance between us. Instead, I said, "You're not going to destroy me. I'm not that fragile." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "So am I said. We sat there in the silence of that massive penthouse drinking $304,000 wine, and I thought, this is either the beginning of something real or the biggest mistake of my life. That's when he collapsed. One moment he was sitting across from me, vulnerable and honest and more human than I'd ever seen him. The next moment his eyes rolled back and he pitched forward, hitting the floor hard enough that I heard his head crack against the marble. I ran to him, turned him on his side. He was convulsing, foam coming from his mouth, his skin turning gray, poisoning. Someone had poisoned the wine, and I'd poured it. I'd opened the bottle, I'd decanted it, I'd served it to him. I had maybe 90 seconds before he died. I could call 911. I could try to save him. And if he lived, he'd probably think I'd tried to kill him. After all, I was the one who'd opened the bottle, who'd been banished to the basement, who had every reason to resent him. Or I could let him die. I could walk away, claim I found him like this, let the investigation unfold however it would. I'd signed an NDA, but dead men can't enforce contracts. And Marcus Hadley, the Vulture, the man who'd fired 4,000 people and barely blinked, would the world really miss him? 90 seconds, 80, 70. His lips were blue, his breathing was shallow, rattling. I thought about my father, about the medical care Marcus had arranged, about the specialist consultation that had added years to his life. I thought about the night Marcus had sat on the floor and admitted he felt nothing. The way he looked at me like I was the only real thing in his universe. I thought about the man who'd worked 3 jobs and slept in his car and built an empire from nothing, and the man who'd become so isolated by that empire that he'd forgotten how to be human. 60 seconds. 50. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Then I forced his mouth open, stuck my fingers down his throat, and made him vomit. The wine came up, dark red, mixed with bile and pieces of his expensive dinner. I kept going until his stomach was empty, until he was gasping and choking but breathing, until the convulsions stopped. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They stabilized him, loaded him onto a gurney, rushed him to the hospital. I rode in the ambulance, holding his hand while they pumped his stomach and pushed fluids and ran toxicology panels. The doctor told me later that if I'd waited even 2 more minutes, Marcus would have died. The wine had been laced with a massive dose of ricin, a poison with no antidote. Only immediate evacuation of the stomach and aggressive supportive care could save someone who'd ingested that much. "You saved his life," the doctor said. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd made an impossible choice and still didn't know if it was the right one. The investigation took 3 weeks. The police, the FBI, private security, everyone wanted to know who'd poisoned a billionaire's wine. They found the answer in the security footage. One of Marcus's business rivals, a man named Thomas Carrington, who'd lost $400 million in a deal Marcus had orchestrated, had bribed one of the kitchen staff to inject the ricin into the cork of the Chateau Cheval Blanc. The staff member had done it weeks earlier, knowing that eventually Marcus would drink that bottle. Carrington was arrested. The staff member cut a deal and testified. Marcus's security protocols were overhauled completely, and Marcus woke up in a hospital bed with me sitting in a chair beside him and said, "You stayed." "I stayed," I confirmed. "Why?" "Because you're not the Vulture," I said. "You're Marcus, and Marcus is worth saving." He started crying. Actual tears streaming down his face. Maybe the first genuine tears he'd shed in decades. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be a person who loves someone and doesn't destroy them." "You learn," I said. "We learned together." That was 8 months ago. A lot has changed since then. Marcus stepped down as CEO of his investment firm and brought in new leadership with a mandate to prioritize ethical practices and worker protection. He established a $500 million fund to support displaced workers from companies he'd previously restructured, retraining programs, education grants, extended health care. He sold the penthouse. Too many bad memories. We moved to a brownstone in Brooklyn, still nice, but human-scaled. A place where neighbors knock on the door and kids play basketball in the street. My father lives with us now. Marcus insisted. He and my dad spend Sunday mornings reading the newspaper and arguing about baseball. It's the weirdest, most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Marcus still has billions. You can't give away that kind of wealth overnight, and honestly, he's more effective using it strategically than just writing checks. But he's different now. Softer, more deliberate, more conscious of the human cost of every decision. We opened a wine bar together in Red Hook. Small place, neighborhood spot, nothing fancy. We serve good wine at reasonable prices, and sometimes Marcus works the bar himself, pouring glasses and talking to customers like they're friends. People don't recognize him. He cut his hair differently, started dressing casually, let himself age naturally instead of fighting it with dermatologists and trainers. He looks like a regular guy. He looks happy. Last week, a customer, a teacher, who'd been laid off from one of Marcus's portfolio companies years ago, came into the bar. She didn't recognize him until he introduced himself. There was a moment of tension, of recognition, of anger flickering in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I'm genuinely sorry for what I did. I can't undo it. But I'm trying to do better now. And if there's anything I can do to help you, I will." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You can pour me a glass of wine, something good." He poured her a glass of a 2015 Domaine Le Fleuve Montrachet. It's a $300 bottle. He charged her $12. She drank it slowly, smiled, and said, "This is really good." "It is," Marcus agreed. She left a $5 tip and walked out. Marcus watched her go, tears in his eyes. "You okay?" I asked. "I will be," he said. "We're getting married next month. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. My father's walking me down the aisle. We're serving wine I've chosen, nothing crazy expensive, just beautiful bottles that mean something to us." Marcus asked me recently if I ever regret staying, if I ever wish I'd walked away when he pushed me out. Every relationship is a gamble, I told him. You risk everything on the chance that someone will see you, really see you, and choose you anyway. I saw you, I chose you, and you chose me back. "Best investment I ever made," he said. He's right. But it's more than that. It's proof that people can change, that wealth doesn't have to corrupt, that someone who built their entire identity on being ruthless can learn to be gentle, that love can exist across impossible divides if both people are willing to meet in the middle. Marcus isn't the Vulture anymore. He's just Marcus, flawed, trying, human. And I'm not the invisible Sommelier anymore. I'm Sophia, loved, seen, real. Sometimes I think about that moment in the wine cellar when his lips were turning blue and I had 90 seconds to decide if he deserved to live. I made the right choice. Not because he's a billionaire, not because of the money or the influence or the comfortable life he can provide, but because underneath all that wealth, all that armor, all that ruthlessness, there was a person worth saving, a person who just needed someone to believe he could be better. And he is. Every day he's better. That's all any of us can ask for. That's everything.